Hello everyone, my name is Sharon. We are very happy today to have Mr. Winston Chu here for our oral histories project of the Law Society of Hong Kong. Hello, Mr. Chu. Very
Hello,
nice
Sharon.
seeing you here. So for today's interview, shall we get started with some general questions first?
Of course.
Can you tell us what motivated you to pursue a career in law?
Well, I've always been interested in justice, and I always feel very frustrated when things are not done in a fair manner. And I feel that the law is the place where you can really find justice being of utmost importance.
I see. It's very good because I think many young lawyers actually nowadays getting in our profession, they are really passionate about pursuing justice. So can you explain or further elaborate on your concept of justice?
Every person will think that he's in the right. So it takes a very wise and knowledgeable person to come to a fair judgment about where is the justice of the matter. That's why in a court case, both sides will think that they're right. But it is for the judge to decide which party is in the right. Therefore, the system is very important to make sure that you have the right judge who is wise, knowledgeable, and fair. And you also need passionate lawyers who believes in their side of the story. It is not their duty to say who is right or who is wrong. Their duty is to represent the client to the best of their ability. It is the function of the judge to decide who is right and who is wrong.
I can't agree more, and this is very insightful.
Yeah, this is how our system works.
Sure. Can you tell us more about do you find being a lawyer very fulfilling and very challenging, and why?
Yes. There are three ways to look at the law. One is purely for the material gain, to get money, to get fame, to get power. That is one way. The other way is to be providing social service. That is too noble. So I rather take the middle line, which is to make a proper balance between material gain and high-minded ideas. So I think lawyers should be practical. You should have your head in the air, but the feet firmly on the ground. And if you manage to do something well, for example, you can make sure that the client you acted for gets justice out of the situation, is a great satisfaction.
Let's cut to the chase because I think now the audience would have some background knowledge about Mr. Chu. Can you tell us about founding the Society for the Protection of the Harbour, because we know that you are very fond of the oceans, right?
Actually, it may sound strange. Although I've devoted 27 years to saving the harbour, it is a job I never wanted to take up.
Really?
It's not only my passion for the harbour, it is, again, the sense of justice, that you should not destroy something beautiful for the wrong reason. It is wrong to sell the harbour for money. You reclaim the harbour, you destroy make land out of it, and the purpose is to sell the land for a lot of money. It is just wrong. So this is a fight I took up because no one else would take up the fight.
I see. So apart from the sense of justice, is there any reasons for you to protect the oceans and the harbor that hard?
Well, I think everyone has a duty to protect what is good and what is beautiful. It is something you owe to yourself as well as to the whole world. So we have a beautiful harbor. Victoria Harbour was at that time very beautiful. It's twice as big as now. And it is very sad to see that we've lost half of it.
True. So we actually did a bit of research and understand that you founded the society together with Miss Christine Law. So can you tell us about how was your relationship with Miss Law, and was she an ideal partner for you in founding or in operating the society?
Well, when I started the fight, it was on the 14th of October, 1994. This is the time when I found out the plans to actually destroy the harbor. It was horrific. At that time, I was on the town planning board. So it was placed before us on the board a plan of the destruction of the Hong Kong Victoria Harbour. It was to reclaim 1,297 hectares, which is 5 square miles of the inner harbour. Not outside the harbour, but inside the harbour. 5 square miles is a very large piece of land that they want to make from the harbour. And let me give you an idea what it means. It means that from Leiyimun all the way to Xiangwan will be a narrow river, 800 meters wide. It will look like Shanghai. It will no longer be Hong Kong. When I mention this to people, they will not believe it. Hence, I've always had to produce this document. You see, as lawyers, we talk about proof. This is the proof. This is what was planned for the harbour. 1,297 hectares means everything in colour will go, and you're left with this narrow river, narrow channel. And this would have been done, completed 10 years ago if we had not started our campaign. You will not have a harbour. You will have what is perhaps called a Victoria River.
I see. So it sounds like it's a huge damage to Hong Kong's natural resources. If it really...
It will just no longer be Hong Kong. You may have 100 or 200 cities sitting on rivers. But a beautiful city with a beautiful harbour, there are only very few. Very few. And Hong Kong is the most beautiful harbour in the whole world. Perhaps Sydney Harbour is more beautiful than Hong Kong Harbour in the daytime, more greenery, more nature. But there's nothing to compare with Victoria Harbour at night. It is just fantastically beautiful. And to ruin it, to destroy it for no good reason, is just not fair.
So, Mr. Chu, can you tell us, how did you work up the courage to take on the government at that time?
Well, it is a job I never wanted, and not even now. If anyone would have the courage and the determination to take up the fight, I'll gladly pass my files to him. But at that time, no one would take up the fight. I talked to a lot of people in Hong Kong who are famous, rich, powerful. They say, hey, something is wrong, we're losing the harbour. But no one would take up the fight. So I was about to give up when I received a command from the only person I have to obey, who was my mother. She was then 80 years old, and she said to me, son, you have to take up this fight. I couldn't say no. That's why I did it. I didn't choose to. I didn't want to. But it's a fight that someone has to take up, and there was no one else, so I did it.
I see. So it sounds like your mother is very strong-minded, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. She's quite a lady.
Yeah, very brave lady, right? So did you manage to get some other people's support in defending the harbour at that time?
In the first year, no one would join us. So it became a sort of family affair, my brothers and sisters. And my mother gave birth to 12 children, 7 boys, 5 girls, all from her.
Amazing.
So we had a family team.
Wow.
And we did the fighting for 1 year with some success. Then 1 year later, I got Christine Low to help me. At that time, we were drafting a law called the Protection of the Harbour Ordinance. And it requires a LegCo member to present the bill to the Legislative Council. So Christine very kindly did it for us. So she proposed the bill in LegCo, and we had to do very hard fighting for almost 2 years before the bill could be passed. Very, very hard fighting. We appeared before LegCo 7 times, with different promotions about the harbour, but we won all of them.
I see.
In fact, in 3 of them, we won unanimously. It was 31-0, 41-0, and 45-0. Government did not get a single vote.
Wow, that's amazing. So at that time, what actually kept you going when things got so tough?
Well, because no one would take up the job. If I didn't do it, the harbor would die. It's like a good example is like you are walking along the harbor front. A little girl fell into the harbor, you know, and everyone says that they couldn't swim. But you are a swimmer. In fact, you may even know life-saving. You're a lifeguard. What do? A wise person will walk away. But next day, when you're in your easy chair, you read the newspaper, a little girl drowned in the harbor, and you feel a lot of guilty conscience. But being an idiot, you know, if you decide to jump in and save the girl, don't expect any thanks. All you do it is not for anyone else, but for yourself. You have an obligation to jump in because no one else knew how to swim, or at least they claim they didn't know how to swim. You know how to swim. You have the chance to save the girl. You don't do it, you'll feel the guilt. You do it, no reward. Just you feel the satisfaction that you did something out of a sense of duty.
Because Mr. Chu has once mentioned your experience in the protection of the harbor ordinance. Can you tell us about like your experience in authoring these ordinances?
So as a lawyer, we always talk about precedents. You never draw something from the head. You always go for precedents. So the first thing I did was to do a lot of research all around the world. I needed to find the precedent of a law that protects the harbor. I went to America, or rather researched American law on the protection of San Francisco Bay. Went to Australia for the law to protect Sydney Harbor. But to my surprise, there's no such law. What they did in those places is that they have community commitment to the environment. They also have democracy. So they couldn't get anything done without the consent of the people. But in Hong Kong, it's the opposite. The government can do what they like, and people have no power to stop them. So when I discovered this flaw in our system, I said that there must be a law to protect the harbor. And hence the invention of the Protection of the Harbor Ordinance. There is no precedent that I could find from anywhere in the world. So the whole ordinance was drafted from scratch.
Oh, really? Then how about the UK? Because I understand that Mrs. Chu actually studied law in the UK, right? Is there any reference?
No, there's no such law in the UK because it just cannot happen.
I see.
The government cannot do something against the wishes of the people. They need to consult the people on the environment, but not in Hong Kong, not at that time.
I see. So Mr. Chu basically have to like draft it from scratch. It's really hard work.
It was very difficult because you have to invent a new law, new language. For example, I classified the harbor as a special public asset and a natural heritage of Hong Kong people. Now, it's a special public asset because everything is a public asset, including a lamppost, including a street sign. It's a public asset, but it's worth not very much. But when you need special protection, I call it a special public asset. It would be like electrical building. It would be like a special public asset of Hong Kong, like what is a good example? Like something that is historical. There's something you need to preserve. And then the second part, natural heritage of Hong Kong people. What is the harbor? We didn't invent it. It came from nature. So it's a natural, it's a heritage. We inherited it from millions of years ago. So it's a natural heritage. Who does it belong to? It doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to us.
Right.
So it's Hong Kong people. Therefore, the key words in the ordinance is that by that law, we made the harbor a special public asset and a natural heritage of Hong Kong people, and with a prescription that you have to protect it. That's how it came.
Thank you.
There's another difficulty. Because it was a private member's bill, you cannot make the government spend money on this idea. So it's not possible to create a harbor authority that will give consent to reclamation matters, because a harbour authority will cost money. So we couldn't do that. We couldn't give the power to the government, because they are the people who wanted to reclaim it, right? We can't give the power to the town planning board, because the town planning board would be rather pro-government. And we couldn't give it to the power to LegCo. We did try, but they say LegCo, the function is legislation, not executive function. They do not make executive decisions. So the section 4, which gave the power to LegCo, was deleted. So our ordinance started with a few pages. It ended up with only 1 page, only 5 sections, but it did the job.
So now we understand that actually the protection of the harbour ordinance is Mr. Chu's baby to defend the ocean and the harbour in Hong Kong. If it has to be amended, what kind of amendment would you hope to see?
Well, before we proceed with the amendments, you have to understand the ordinance had no bite, which means we cannot arrest the government. We cannot arrest real estate developers wanting to reclaim the harbour. We cannot fine them. So the only thing we could do was to give the power to the law courts to decide whether the reclamation is reasonable, hence a judicial review. And to get to a judicial review, we gave the discretion to, we call it a presumption against reclamation. So if they do not follow the presumption, then people can take them to court on a judicial review. That's why we've been taking the government to court several times because of that. So that system has been working well. There has been a recent suggestion that we should amend the law and take away the power of protection that is given to the Hong Kong people. That is completely wrong. Once you take away this power of protection, once again, anyone can do what they like with the government, with the harbour, and you cannot stop them.
So because Mr. Chu, you mentioned the judicial review that you initiated earlier. Can you tell us whether you have any view or opinions on the current judicial review process in Hong Kong?
According to our research, when we started our judicial review process in the early 2000s, I think we started 2002, there were very few judicial reviews against the government, especially on environmental matters. I believe we were the second case, but the very first case that went all the way up to the Court of Final Appeal. So there are very, very few cases up to then. But because of our successes in the law courts, especially the Court of Final Appeal judgment pronounced on the 9th of January 2004, after that, the floodgate was opened. There were hundreds of cases every year of judicial review. Perhaps the pendulum swung too far the other way. A lot of them had no merits, but people will still try to control what the government can do, and that was really perhaps going a bit too far. We did not intend that.
I see. But still you think judicial review is quite important in Hong Kong,
It's
right?
an extremely important process, provided that it is not abused. Even the law can be abused. Legal processes can be abused. So one can issue a writ against anyone you like.
True.
They cannot stop you. But then it will be an abuse if you just put in nonsense.
We also note that actually when you stand up very firmly to defend the harbour, you and your family member actually received quite a number of threats from unknown parties. So how did you actually deal with this kind of situation and challenges?
Well, we received 2 threats, I think from the same source. It threatened my mother with death, my wife with rape, and myself with death. It was to be taken seriously because the writer knew our family background. So it was just nonsense. It was just not sort of nonsensical threat. So we had to take it seriously. Hong Kong is a unusual place. There can be a lot of violence. For example, some editors got attacked, and some friends of mine got attacked too. for example, Zhang Daiban,
True.
and quite a few. So we had to take it seriously. So to respond in a reasonable way, I stepped down as chairman, and Christine Lo very kindly and very bravely took up the job as a chairman. And I took my wife and mother abroad and stayed away for a few months until the whole thing died down. It had to be taken seriously.
So everything is all right now.
Yes, Hong Kong is an interesting place, but you need to be careful.
After an intensive discussion of like how Mr. Chu had spent time on defending the harbour, let's move to like a more relaxing discussion. Can you tell us about like your hobbies? Because we all know that you are very fond of like poetry and writing poems, right?
Well, I started my university studies in literature. I joined the Hong Kong U Arts faculty in 1956, and I did 1 year literature under Professor Edmund Blunden, very famous English poet. And I've always been interested in literature before I took up law. So I kept up my interest, and I started writing poetry back in 1958. So it's been more than 60 years. I kept it a very secret matter, so I didn't want people to know.
Really?
Being a poet gives people the idea that you're not very practical.
So Mr. Chu, can you share with us, like, because we know that you actually combine your passion for poetry and your passion to harbour, and then write some poetry in relation to that, right? Can you share like your masterpiece with us?
My hobby in writing poetry came to the public eye only because at that time people attacked me for stopping reclamation because I was working for real estate developers to cut down on the land supply. Completely not true. But how can you deny something which is not true? The only way to do it is to give a positive answer. So I said, look, I have been defending the harbour, and because I'm passionate about the harbour, because even back in 1962, was a young man, still a law student, I defended the harbour, and I wrote a poem for the harbour, a long one, 23 verses, called Victoria Harbour. So I showed the newspaper reporters my book on with this poem, and they were then impressed. And that was the way to refute the suggestion that was acting for the real estate developers.
So, Mr. Chu, you actually mentioned the economic development as well as the real estate development in Hong Kong. Then, can you tell us, like, as a lawyer, how can we strike a balance between like the economic development against the vis-a-vis the protection of the natural resources in our city?
I think, as a lawyer, it's too easy to hide behind the law. I think we have a duty to obey the law, to administer the law, but also to change the law. In my time in Hong Kong, I've seen the Hong Kong government change from being completely practical and completely capitalistic, only concerned with money and business and so on, into a very responsible institution. The Hong Kong government now does look after the environment. So we've passed a number of legislations for that. And so I think Hong Kong is heading in the right direction. I have now come to be supportive of the Hong Kong government because they are doing a good job on the environment.
So you do have expectation on the government on defending our like natural scenery and natural resources.
Yeah, all of us has a duty to help the government take the right path. You can influence people by your opinion. It matters.
So thank you very much for Mr. Chu's sharing. So actually I have two last questions. The first one is like, is there anything else that you would like to share? And the second one is like, me being a young lawyer, I'm very happy to see you here. So do you have like any words of encouragement that you can share with all the young lawyers?
I think so. I think now that I've been in the legal profession for 61 years, and I've been devoting my life to the law, I can tell young lawyers that this is a very important piece of work that you're doing, because the harmony of a society depends upon the rule of law. And you have to obey the law and to administer law to the best of your ability to make society function properly. Okay, every case you do may not make a tremendous difference, but it does. Every good job you do increases the standard of the rule of law by a little bit. But everything you do badly decreases the rule of law a little bit. So I would advise young lawyers to act on your conscience. So you have to behave in accordance with your sense of duty, sense of commitment, and sense of justice. When I was admitted as a lawyer, and that time the Chief Justice was Sir Ivor Rigby, and he said to me, at that time was 1-to-1, and he said, Mr. Chu, do not be too concerned with the word law, but be more concerned with the word fair. So I've always thought that was excellent advice. It's the same advice I would give to young lawyers. Don't be too much concerned with just the word law. You have to obey the law, but it must also be with a sense of fairness. That is important.
Actually, I have a question for Mr. Chu. If you were not a lawyer, then what do you think you would have become?
I don't think I would like to be anything else than a lawyer, for a very good reason. As a lawyer in the past years, I find that I'm able to do many things that other people cannot do. One example is the harbour. Up to now, the harbour has been saved, and that is something I feel satisfied with. I don't feel proud. Two things I've tried not to be, which is first, wrath. One cannot be too angry with what you do. You need to be under control. You cannot be too radical. I think in recent times, you can see people got a bit too radical, and it has a counter effect. So the second thing one cannot afford, especially as a lawyer, is the word arrogance. One has always got to be humble. So I was able to learn the word arrogance when I became a teacher, and I mixed up with my students, and I learned so much from them. So these two words are important. As a lawyer, keep your emotions under control.
That's very enlightening. Thank you, Mr. Chu, and thank you for your time for the interview today. And as a token of appreciation, actually, we have prepared a pair of cute bears from the Law Society of Hong Kong.
Thank you.
Yeah, a souvenir. Thanks.
Thank you very much.